Okay, good evening from Glasgow, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here for this side event here at the COP26 venue in Glasgow. The session right now we are going to conduct is building resilience of mountain communities from highlands to oceans in the face of the climate crisis. And you know, we are advocating for the mountain agenda since long for the protection and promotion of the rights of the mountain communities in Nepal, the remote mountain part. Basically, we are working with the mountain communities for building the resilience capacity of them, and also, capacitating them for the different kind of the climate crisis issues. But now, the climate change has become not only the agenda of the mountain people, but also the matter of survival of the humanity. And as we are discussing in this session, from highland to the ocean in the face of climate crisis, I want to add that it is not only survival of the mountain communities, but also the downstream communities and the people living in the oceans. So today we have Professor Asim here with us physically. Professor Asim is working in the public policy and the computer science division, and also the director of Institute for Environment, Diplomacy and Security at the University of Vermont. Welcome, Dr. Asim. Likewise, we have Kathleen Wedlick. Dr. Kathleen works with Transboundary Water Cooperation Network on policy and governments. Welcome, Dr. Kathleen. Likewise, we have few speakers who couldn't make it physically today. We have Maria de Pilar Cornejo. Maria is Dean of Faculty of Maritime Engineering and Marine Sciences at the Polytechnic University, Ecuador. Likewise, we have Jui-Wen Chen. Jui-Wen Chen is the inventor of JW Eco-Technology and chairman of Association of Sustainable Ecological Engineering and Development. So I'd like to welcome the expert panels over here and those who are joining remotely in this side event. So let me start with my presentation. So I'll briefly like to talk about the mountain agenda and why we are raising the mountain agenda and why it is important for the sustainable human future. Let me go with the presentations. So talking about the mountain agenda and talking okay. So why mountain are important and why mountain matters, why you need to discuss in the mountain agenda in this COP26 and at the different negotiations process. As you know that mountain is home to 15% of the world populations and about half of the world biodiversity, mountain it has, and mountain provide the fresh water for everyday life to more than half of the humanity, and basically all the food hubs that important food crops, 6 of the 20 most important food crops are originated from the mountains. However, mountain regions are as the forefront of the climate change impacts with imminent water crisis and huge loss due to climate-induced disaster, but they are more vulnerable and often neglected in the mainstream development process as well. And the mountain and its unique characteristics, vulnerability, threats, and its role for building resilience are not adequately represented in the UNFCCC and the climate negotiation processes. And mountain people, as I discussed, often feel political, social, and economic marginalization and lack of access to such basic services. And talking about the impacts of climate change in the mountain, climate crisis is hitting hard in the mountains. The glaciers are melting twice, and as well as the warming at the 3 times the global average. It's more in the mountain areas. And 1/3 of the Himalayan glaciers will vanish by 2100, even if the global warming is halted to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we are talking here in COP to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade, but the data shows that even if the temperature is we maintain it to 1.5 degree, the 1/3 of the Himalayan glaciers will vanish. So the impact of the climate crisis is really hitting hard in the mountains, and many villages in the mountain regions are going to be displaced and they are forced to relocate, and 53% of the mountain populations are vulnerable to the food insecurity. The recent IPCC report has also said that the climate change is really the red code for the humanity. Even if we limit the temperature to 1.5 degree, our ice sheets will melt. And in the next 1,000 years, even if we, cut the carbon emissions, then the ice will continue to melt. That's really devastating situations we are going to face in the future. And increase in 1 degree centigrade leads to increase in 7% extreme weather events. And right now also we are facing the extreme weather events in South Asia region as well as in different mountain countries and Nepal. And talking about the South Asia, we are facing the unseasonal floods and landslides in the late October. We can see that, and the extreme precipitation, river floods across the Asia and South Asia as well. Talking about the impacts of the mountain in Nepal, in the past few years, the impacts is really visible, like the Melamchi flood we have seen 2021. In 2021, only we face a huge loss of the human and economic losses in Nepal, like Manang flood, Jure landslide, snowstorm in the Annapurna region, Seti river flood, and at the end of the October, there was unseasonal flood due to which there was a huge economic loss. And talking about the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas, there are many lakes which are in the verge of like glacier lake outburst flood. 47 dangerous lakes on the Kosi, Gandak and Karnali basins, and 31 are at a very high risk. So if the ice continues to melt, then there is a high risk of the glacier lake outburst floods. So talking about the implications of the mountain, not only the glacier lakes, outburst floods, not only unseasonal floods and landslides we are facing the impacts on the mountain economy as well, as we have the livestock based economy, and it's vanishing due to the degradation of the pastoral land as well, and tourism, one of the main key economic activity in the region, and due to the impacts of the climate change, the tourism sector is highly impacted as well. And talking about the the GDP loss, right now we have 1.5 to 2% of the GDP loss annually, and it is projected that by 2100 we have 13% of the GDP loss. And the food insecurity, it's been rising due to the production losses. And talking about the downstream impacts, as I already mentioned, the glacier lake outburst floods, more frequent floods already in the fragile region with short term of increasing river discharges, drought in the long run with glacierless mountains and waterless rivers, likewise changes in the hydrological cycles. These are some of the impacts which could be visibly seen, but it had the long-term impacts as well, such as poverty and injustice, traditions and the customary practices are being lost, and migration and the forced displacement as well. Basically, as CSOs, and we are directly working with the communities in the mountain areas, directly with the vulnerable and the marginalized people. We are working together with them, and we are raising their voice and their demands. So right before this COP26, we together with the mountain people and different stakeholders in our country had organized a mountain symposium for raising the voices of the mountain peoples, and through that symposium we had put forwarded some demands to the government of Nepal as well as the global communities on behalf of the mountain communities to raise the voice of mountain people. And basically I like to put forward few of our demands, like we urge all parties to address the issues of effect of climate change on food security and livelihood affecting women, marginalized and the vulnerable communities, and force them to execute the climate resilient policies, ensuring financing and implementation mechanism, assuring the voice of the most vulnerable and who are left behind. And likewise, we urge the parties to agree on the loss and damage permanent agenda item of the UNFCCC, that Nepal government to strongly link and advocate on these issues based on the recent extreme weather events that we are facing, as Nepal high mountains are in high risk and need to seek the dedicated finance mechanism for the loss and damage. Likewise, we demand for the need for collaboration between the mountain and the island countries in the international climate change discourse. Right now, on behalf of Nepal, we are advocating that we need to raise the mountain agenda in the negotiation process and in different climate-related processes. But Nepal alone cannot do this, as we don't have such kind of strong voice. So we are advocating with the government of Nepal as well to go together with other developing countries, other mountain countries, to make the coalition. Right now, we are in the LDC forum and we are just advocating on behalf of the LDC countries, but Nepal is soon going to be, like, graduate from the LDC after 2022. Then what will Nepal advocate and lobby for? So there should be a strong mountain coalition and the network to advocate the mountain agenda on behalf of the communities who are more vulnerable, and they are going to face the extreme events in the near future. So we demand for the collaboration between the mountainous and the island countries in the international climate change discourses. And we also urge the United Nations member states to establish a separate UN mechanism to deal with the mountain crisis, which is really very important in the near future. Likewise, we urge the government to raise and lead the issues and agenda of the mountain countries during the COP, including other international forums. And basically, we also encourage our government to develop effective and efficient collaborative partnership and cooperation initiatives to tackle the global mountain issues and agenda, not only the mountain countries, but also other global agendas as well. And also the global communities to recognize the mountain as a pulse of the planet and harness the strength of the mountain region to enhance regional and international cooperations. And also we need to invest on the study, research, and monitor and identify the knowledge gaps, needs and opportunity constraints of the mountain ecosystem and the sustainable development. So just talking about the needs of the mountain communities, the impacts they are facing, and the crisis we are going to face in the near future, we are lobbying with the government to raise the mountain agenda and bring it in the table. So I have just put forward a few highlights of the COP26 Leader Summit events, where our Prime Minister had highlighted the key agendas. In his speech, he has urged the world leaders to recognize the specific climate vulnerability of the high mountains and accord high priority to the mountain agenda in all climate-related negotiations. And also, the government called upon the parties to agree on making loss and damage a standalone agenda for negotiations and support the framework of additional financing for it, as well as to raise awareness on the climate crisis in the mountain region. The government will host the Sagarmatha Samvad, the dialogue named after the Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world. And keeping the global temperature below 1.5 degrees is vital for the mountain people and is the issue of our survival. As the Prime Minister of Nepal, on behalf of the mountain communities, he has raised the agenda, and which we are talking since long, and this is the declaration which we had talked just before the COP26, and we have handed it over to the government as well. So thank you. This was from my side. So we will have discussion later on. So I'll request my colleague Asim to have his presentation on the transboundary water issues. Transboundary water issues, and also to highlight his presentation and brief overview of Transboundary Water Cooperation Network and its new program on Highland to Oceans, Anticipatory Governance of Hydroclimatic Regime Shifts on the river basins. Over to you, Asim.
Geeta, thank you very much. Really appreciate this, and I really honor our collaboration in organizing this side event. I really like the like what you said about the need to have mountain communities, the presenter, we need to have emphasize the emphasis you put on why mountain communities and their survival is very critical, because they are at the forefront of climate change. But I also think that want to point out that what happens in the mountains does not stay in the mountains. It has inevitable effects downstream, because water flows from highlands to the oceans, and that's why we have launched a new initiative called Highlands to Oceans, H2O, which basically stands like how water connects highlands to oceans through these transboundary river basins. And this new initiative is a collaboration between Institute for Environmental Diplomacy and Security at the University of Vermont, as well as Bennington College, which we serve as the Secretariat for the Transboundary Water and Cooperation Network. And I will speak for about 10 minutes, and then one of our collaborators, Dr. Pilar Cornejo, who's in Ecuador, but she's done work. She was the former National Secretary of Ecuador. She'll talk about some of these work that they're doing in Amazon Basin. And then Dr. Caitlin Waddick would talk about the broader Transboundary Water and Cooperation Network. So I think one of the important points that I want to make is that as building off of what Geeta was saying about the mountain communities, but more recently you might be familiar with this World Met Organization report that identified global water stress hotspots all over the world. But if you look at the map, the most darkest of those are in the South Asia region, the red colors, and that indicates the amount of stress that would happen in South Asia because of the melting glaciers in the Himalayas in the Tibetan Delta. That would also affect the Eastern Asia as well as the Central Asia. So this glacial melt, polar melt region is going to be a massive challenge for about billions of people living in that subcontinent, as well as Central Asia and Eastern Asia. But we're not the only ones being affected. It's also people in Western Northern America, who are very, very rich, especially in the Southwest, people living in the Western Southern America, in the Andean Mountain region, who are our partners in this Transboundary Water and Cooperation Network. People in Southeast Australia are also vulnerable to this. And Australians need to play up their role in this climate change mitigation battle. So I think that the point is that this report states that about 2.3 billion people out of the 7 billion people on the planet in 2018 were water stressed. And about 3.6 billion people are projected to be facing this water stress by the middle of this century. It might even go up to 5 billion people. So this is a huge challenge that we face on the planet because water is life. When we look into this, kind of like the World Met Organization recommendations, like what we can do about to improve the implementation and effectiveness of climate services for water worldwide, they came up with 4 recommendations. One of them is like, well, invest in integrated resources water management as a solution to better manage water stress. Invest in end-to-end drought and flood early warning systems. Fill the capacity gap in collecting data for basic hydrological variables, which underpin climate services and early warning systems, and improve the interaction among national-level stakeholders to co-develop and operationalize climate services with information users to better support adaptation in the water sector. We think that all 4 of these are great recommendations. We need to act on those. This report lays out all the gaps that exist and what can be done about this. From what we call like anticipatory governance. Anticipatory governance is exactly this, that we anticipate the risk that's going to happen in the future, and we act now to anticipate that risk and mitigate that risk from climate change. I think at the same time, these recommendations assume that riparian countries in these large transboundary river basins are willing to cooperate and coordinate their efforts. So these recommendations really ignore the imminent reality of water wars within and across riparian countries due to climate change. And if you look at the water wars, for example, that are already happening in the Middle East where the water stress is, that are already happening in South Asia. So I think we need to think about that these climate change-induced changes and water shortages are going to induce more likely a horde of water wars, which, for example, Syria and Sudan already represent what we're going through. So in this case, for example, the transboundary water, like when we look at highlands to oceans, on the left-hand side, you see the Indus map that represents 4 countries, India, China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, in the red boundaries. And it is dependent, about 35% of the water in Indus Basin is dependent on the glacial melt and rainfall from monsoons. But what happens in the upstream in terms of like who is building dams in China or upstream India or upstream Pakistan has huge effects downstream in terms of the access to the water. The water, downstream water is being used for irrigation, for farming, for food production. It's used for hydropower. It's also used for drinking water supply, but it's also very, very essential that we leave some water behind for environmental flows so the ecosystems can able to have resilience to adapt and respond to these changes. Similarly, we see that a lot of dams in the Mekong Basin, which are shown in the triangles on the right-hand side of the picture, are also affecting the distribution and allocation of water between food and agriculture and energy and drinking water supply and ecological uses. Here I'm showing you the Jordan River Basin, which is, as you know, is already a conflict zone, and with climate change, it's expected it could, with droughts and all that, it could get worse. In the war, it could intensify the war that is already happening there since last 70 years. And then we have the Amazon system, which, as you saw, is already one of the stressed regions where we have a lot of dams in the Andean mountains on the left-hand side of this. So in this context, we are working on building these anticipatory governance models that could really understand that what happens in the climate negotiations, like whether we follow RCP 4.5, like the 1.5 degree centigrade path, or whether we follow the worst case RCP 8.5 climate regime. And that would have an effect also on El Nino patterns, but also the glacial regimes, whether glaciers stay stable or degraded. Of course, if we follow RCP 8.5, we stay on the course, the glacier is going to melt. That's going to have huge effect on hydroclimatic regimes. We might get a lot of flash flooding, but also droughts, which is going to have an effect on the availability of these ecosystem services, which could lead to mass migrations and socio-political stability in these downstream regions would be compromised because the water demand would not be met. So we are looking into this, like what we can do at the regional transboundary scale, but also within the countries, whether we can build cooperation and avoid the conflict by proactive and anticipatory interventions. So in this case, we're looking at like how do transboundary governance regimes, whether they are cooperative or conflictive, whether the national subnational water policies are anticipatory or reactive, affect the provision of aquatic ecosystem services to farmers, energy producers, and households, and prevent mass migrations under alternate climate change and so regimes. But also, our goal is to prevent the water wars. Then the question is like, can we build these, harness satellite data and all these kind of data sets to do integrative modeling of these cascading regime shifts and engage the stakeholders, especially communities who are vulnerable to this, to provide the risk and the early warning systems that was part of the World Met Organization recommendation, early warning, early action systems. Can we build those? But for that, we need lots of capacity building and resources from Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund that is severely in short supply right now. So the anticipatory governance approaches are broadly covered. It does not only include early warning, early action systems, which were part of the earlier approaches, more like coming from probabilistic and improbabilistic and more like controlled science-based approaches. Right now, we're also talking about more like pluralistic and plausible approaches where we engage the communities and do the participation. So we are taking a very broad perspective on that. And in that sense, we've been we have built these models that can integrate water, climate change, as well as land use, land cover change, and the demands of the agents, of the farmers, of energy producers, of households in these watersheds across all the ways from highlands to the oceans, and then simulate under what conditions floods and droughts would emerge. And then these models could be used as early warning systems, both at operational but also tactical and large scales. So to have and implement this vision, we have set up a network of networks. That is Transboundary Water in Cooperation Network Twin. You can go to transboundarywater.org. And of course, Dr. Kaylin Wardick is going to talk about that after my next presentation, a video of Dr. Pilar, but then she will expand more on this. There's also, we have been working with a variety of stakeholders to identify the gaps in current transboundary watershed monitoring, like where we have lots of, we definitely have satellite data, but we also need to have a lot of the data that is from the field base, so we could calibrate our integrated models for improving the accuracy of our early warnings, and also the responses to those early warnings can be embedded into those. We also are promoting scientist-to-scientist track 2 and community-to-community track 3 cooperation, but the goal of this track 2 and track 3 diplomacy is to have an eventual effect on the track 1 diplomacy, the kind of diplomacy that's going outside this all in the COP26 meetings. And finally, I also want to emphasize that in our previous work, we found that we really need to figure out a way to integrate the indigenous knowledge and wisdom with scientific knowledge to secure clean water. In that sense, I'll be next, we'll be showing you Dr. Pilar Cornejo's video. She cannot be here in person because of her commitments, but she has recorded this video and will be able to take the answers and questions and follow through that. So I really want to thank you, all of you, and some of the partners and some of these funding agencies like National Science Foundation and USDA NIFA and our twin network has helped us develop this program and project. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk about building resilience of communities from highland to oceans in the face of climate crisis. What is important is how we face the current climate change challenges. And we have come across with working with a quadruple helix model where we work together, academia, government, society, and industry. They have proven very important model during the pandemic. We use the umbrella of United Nations 4 programs, Sendai Framework for Action for Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the new urban agenda that established the relationship with rural communities, especially in terms of food security. In this co-production model, where we are working together, we make alliance with key stakeholders. For example, the public sector, the local governments, the academia, communities, innovation hubs, and the private sectors to determine what are the needs and priorities locally. We also have an advisory academic council that helps development of action strategies and policies to adopted by the different actors, sectors, and at the local scale. In this co-production model, we make innovation and transfer of knowledge to the people that works in the local government and the municipality with different services that help them build up resilience. This capacity development is very important because it hands-on training. We work hand in hand with the people in the municipality. We also do what is a crowdfunding process. In this case, I'm coming from the academia, from SPOL, the university allow us to put our time in research as an in-kind contribution. The municipality puts fresh money to pay for the assistantships, the training, some field trips, and so low-cost equipment. The most important thing is to assess what are the causes of this city vulnerability, considering exposure, population sensitivity, and active capacity to establish what are the different alternatives for reducing its vulnerability to flooding. In the past, we have noticed that we have extreme climate events that are becoming chronic. In the last 6 to 5 years, we have seen an increase in these extreme events, changing the return period of events that occur every 50 years to a couple of years. These chronic disturbances are important because they impact the underestimate infrastructure and social processes of the regular settlements that we find in this city. We have to take into account these changes in precipitation, return periods for urban hydrology, and to be able to assess what are the institutional and social impacts that this made. So at the end, what we come up with is designing strategies for climate resilience in the cities. We have worked with the municipality to create new ordinance, new laws that adopt the Sendai Framework of Action for Disaster Risk Reduction and adaptation to climate change in their land use and resilience planning. Also, we work on strengthening the institutional governance and social capacity along with the community for resilience and to adopt knowledge management and urban innovation. At the end, we also add urban landscape design and ecosystems for resilience in the city planning. We came out afterwards with an early warning system, which is based on the community. We have some equipments for monitoring and alerts, some information coming from the National Meteorological and Hydrological Service, but also we have the community of environmental observers that help us identify thresholds on real time. We also established the dissemination and communication accordingly to the Ecuadorian law to the different governmental levels. And this allows us to have a response plan to floods that is enforced by the municipality.
Yeah, thank you, Asim, for a wonderful presentation. And the most important point I noted down, as in the presentation of Pilar as well, engaging the communities in building resilience and capacity building, as well as engaging the vulnerable communities is the most, as you mentioned, and as in the Pilar presentation as well. Thank you for both of you. Now I'd like to request Kathleen to make her presentation. And Kathleen, could you please move ahead? She is presenting on building resilience to climate change in Indus, Mekong, Jordan, and Amazon basins.
Okay. My name is Caitlin Waddick, and I'm associated with Bennington College and UVM in Vermont. I work for the Transboundary Water and Cooperation Network. Clean water is essential for all functions of life: food production, energy, sanitation, health, livelihoods. Increased demand for water from development and climate change pose severe challenges to water security, and the water conflicts of today cannot be solved without transboundary cooperation. TWIN, Transboundary Water in Cooperation Network, we are enabling discussion to build transboundary cooperation through diplomacy at all levels. And the goal is to find points of cooperation that can break stalemates. So we're using principles of mediation and negotiation, looking for points of consensus and conflict. What are people's positions? What are the value differences in their problem frameworks? And how do we get people at each track, and really at all tracks, to build causal maps of the problem? Generally, we find that people agree that that they need clean water. People can agree more easily sometimes on needing water quality issues than water quantity issues. So that's always a good starting point. An example of our work is in the Kabul River system. We gathered people in Montreal, and there's, our purpose is really to come up with some science-informed, community-based actions that can address conflict and address essential needs in communities. All water is transboundary, and in this slide you can see 6 of the river basins that we're working in, and you can imagine that there are lots of boundaries. We are a network of networks, so in each of these basins there are networks of people working on water, on transboundary water cooperation, and our work networks those groups. So we are scholars, activists, policymakers, practitioners, and our group, TWIN, was developed by the Center for Advancement of Public Action at Bennington College and the Institute for Environmental Diplomacy at the University of Vermont. These are some of our members, and they're organized by river basin here, and we are a growing network, and we're always looking for new collaborators from all sectors of society as well as individuals. Our mission is to strengthen existing organizational networks. We are addressing water scarcity, the degradation of water quality, and the growing impacts of climate change. We are promoting cooperation and collaboration among all network stakeholders who have transboundary water challenges. Our vision is to promote water cooperation among countries and regions, municipalities, and villages. We are working to improve border relations, water use practices, water quality, ecosystem services, and public health on various sides of various borders, right? It's never just a two-sided issue. And ultimately, we want to build resilience for climate change. Our activities are committed to conforming to the values of all international conventions and treaties on the equitable sharing of resources. And we are committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 6 that addresses the access to clean water. Please visit our website and join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen, for And transboundary cooperation is really important, and you are working with a lot of networks and network of the networks, as you mentioned, but it is also the political agenda, the water issues and the transboundary water issues is the political agenda. So the political leadership also need to sit in the table to resolve the crisis and the water security issues, as you mentioned. So that's great. So I think we need to move forward to the next presentation, that is from Jui-Wen Chen. Jui-Wen Chen from ASEED, Taiwan. So I think, yeah.
Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today at this COP26 event. Our current presentation is on building carbon capturing, carbon negative, resilient community infrastructures with JW Eco technology to reverse the climate crisis and create carbon economy. Our speaker today is the inventor of JW Eco technology, Mr. Jui-Wen Chen.
Thank you. 大家好，我是 JW 时代工华发明人陈瑞文，来自台湾。非常荣幸有此机会，在 COP26 与大家针对目前的气候变迁共同提出解方。
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jui-Wen Chen, inventor of the JW Eco technology. I am from Taiwan. It is an honor to be with you today at the COP26 and together provide solution for the climate change.
长期以来，我们持续地在地球种下负面的循环因子，造成大自然中风水火土的四大不协调。因此，我们看到越来越多的自然灾害发生。
For a long time, we've been planting seeds of negativity into our planet, disrupting the course of nature's four elements: wind, water, fire, and earth. Hence, more and more natural disasters are happening.
环境的问题已不再是单一的地点新闻，而是广大同时在全球发生的现象，并且已来到了你我的家门口。我们不能置身度外，就让我们开始行动吧。
Environmental issues today are no longer individual cases. They are now experienced everywhere and have arrived at our doorsteps. We can't turn ourselves away anymore. Let us act. Okay, without further ado, we will continue to our presentation of today. Our presentation is on building carbon capturing, carbon negative, resilient community infrastructures with JW Eco technology in order to reverse the climate crisis and create carbon economy. We are the Association of Sustainable Ecological Engineering Development, ASEED, and our vision is to embrace Earth and benefit humanity using JW Eco technology to solve Earth's environmental risks and building JW Eco smart sponge cities to reverse a safe land for our future generations. On 2015 COP21, we made promises to improve our climate change situation. However, researchers show that 2015 to 2019 has been the warmest 5-year period recorded. With disasters becoming more and more frequent and deadly, how many 5 years do we have? We should act with effective solutions that won't cause any side effects. The solutions that we currently use not only doesn't solve problems effectively, it creates more, forming a negative cycle. But we found a solution to this. In Taiwan, 2018, August 23, 600 millimeters of rain poured down on the city of Tainan within 24 hours, causing severe flooding and heavy loss. Analyzing this disaster, we found that the main causes behind them are the inadequate management of developments and constructions. However, one school in this city, called the Liming High School, which was located in the epicenter, managed to avoid this severe flooding. So how did the school campus, being 70 centimeters lower than surrounding grounds and full of gutters and draining systems, manage to avoid this serious flooding and also save 22,000 tons of water for recycling and reusing? It is by using JW Eco technology, which opened up its enclosed surfaces. This revolutionizes traditional construction concepts, creating a positive cycle in the environment and economy. To be precise, JW ecotechnology activates the circulation of nature's 4 elements, achieving self-restoration of the environment. It allows on-site infiltration of rainwater, which can then be stored underground in the JW Eco water banks, solving 2 problems at once. Also providing water for arid areas, which is purified within the JW ecotechnology system, achieving a first-rate water quality. Here we can compare the before and after. Air is also able to circulate between atmosphere and soil, with pollutants and carbon being captured during this process, solving air pollution, which also activates the regulating of temperature, solving heat island effects. In summer, roads using JW ecotechnology can go up to 21 degrees cooler than traditional asphalt roads. In winter, pavements using JW ecotechnology can help melt snow. So with an opened up surface, JW ecotechnology revives the soil, forming a JW eco-pavement wetland ecosystem underground, providing food in urban areas, and creating oases in deserts, helping solve desertification problems. When using JW ecotechnology in roads, it is the only permeable pavement that is able to handle heavy load and traffic, making it suitable for use in road located in seaports and airports, solving issues of traditional permeable pavements. It is also the only permeable pavement able to maintain high infiltration rate of water after 10 years. So here is a comparison on the benefits and the cost of JW ecotechnology with traditional permeable pavements. Please note that this is the situation of Taiwan, and it may vary a bit according to your site and design. So JW ecotechnology can be used throughout different scales and for different purposes. From environmental planning on school campuses to infrastructure development of communities. Corporate collaboration, helping them achieve social responsibility and contributions. To reversing harsh environments into study sites for different domains, like resilience, sustainability, carbon capturing, carbon negativity. So JW ecotechnology has been recognized by a variety of sectors, like the engineering and construction, energy, environmental, and climate change, and low carbon. It has also been appointed by the public and private sector throughout international events. Facing a global climate crisis, we should act in a holistic yet localized way for a change to be possible from highland to ocean, from urban to rural. Creating JW smart sponge cities, reserving a safe and pure land for our future generations, and reversing the climate crisis. This will require a lot of bravery and dedication. So we have prepared a short video documenting how have the brave people from many different sectors, how do they view JW ecotechnology.
The situation has come to the extent that the Taiwan population have no choice than to seek refuge in God by engaging themselves in prayers.
Les femmes continuent à supporter la plus grande partie de la charge des activités du ménage, y compris l'approvisionnement en eau. Elles consacrent la plupart de leur temps, à savoir 90%, à effectuer les tâches domestiques, dont la collecte de l'eau.
然后用正确的方法来为我们海绵城市起到了一个全球一个学习的一个标杆。
We are targeting innovation that helps solve problems that we're all facing together today around the world.
我是JW生态工华的发明人陈瑞文，来自台湾。不论你来自哪里，今天我们聚集在 COP22， 为的就是要如何拯救我们共同的母亲地球。
I met Dr. Chen 5 years ago in Paris during the climate change Paris Agreement that was upheld at the United Nations Conference of Parties 21, UN COP 21 in La Bourget, Paris. The strategic partnership that our NGO African Climate Change Research Center is establishing with JW Ecotechnology is very important and timely in celebrating the climate change negative impacts, not only in Nigeria and Taiwan, but also across the globe.
Okay, our motivation for using it is that to improve our flooding in our country.
Nous avons un manque d'infrastructures routières et surtout quand c'est encore une route qui peut récupérer de l'eau, qu'on peut réutiliser encore, ça devient encore plus intéressant. C'est pour cela que je suis intéressée à collaborer avec vous et je ferai mon mieux auprès des gouvernements d'un retour pour que vraiment le projet voit le jour dans mon pays. C'est mon souhait.
今天我们在这里有一个total solution， 所以我们既然有这样子一个很好的工坊，目前来讲，我们已经发展到全球去了。
是要从今天就开始从今天就开始行动，要以自然的生态工法来修复地球。
As the opportunities available, yes, I will. If I have a chance to recommend it, I will definitely do. We are there to support the technology.
This research site is the first and only location in the United States where JW's eco-technology method is currently being used and researched.
Since JW Ecotechnology demonstrated permeability that is greater than 10,000 millimeters per hour, we hypothesize the construction of drainage ditches around the pavement may not be necessary.
L'ONG Pandey travaille actuellement avec la communauté technologique sur l'initiative de l'eau au niveau d'Asim, qui est plutôt un projet d'adaptation. 面对即将召开的冬奥会，在市政府的强力领导下和 GW 生态工法发明人陈瑞文博士及其团队的全力帮助支持下，实施了以各类道路 GW 生态工法和透水涂料为主要形式的5个示范项目建设。
那事实上 ，JW 生态工法就是达成海绵城市最好的方法。也最近在南部的水灾也验证说，的确是非常重要的一个工法。
在我学校做这样的工法，它是成功的。
And that is why you were selected by the Energy Globe Award Committee for this prize as a Taiwan winner. And I want to hand over the certificate and the award. It's companies like that that use technology for the betterment of humankind that are going to change the world.
66，让我们一起为自己的社区、城市、国家的未来负责，建设可补碳、零碳排的 JW 生态智慧海洋城市，来修复地球，改善暖化危机，为地球带来一个净零的家。
Yeah, I'd like to, thank Jui-Wen Chen for sending us these presentations. That was really wonderful. And, the climate change is the problem created by the energy sector, and the water sector is facing so much problem, So that's why the actions is needed in the ground, and the technology they are being using, that's quite great. And we need to replicate it to the other places as well. And, Asim, like I want to ask you, like as we are talking about the issues of climate change and water, it revolving around the water issues basically, as the impact is really seen by the energy sector, as I said. And we are today talking about like climate change and the water issues from mountains to transboundary river basins, Amazon river basins. We talk about that. It had been always a problem of too much water and too little water. Sometimes we had droughts, we are facing droughts, and sometimes we have too much water, unseasonal precipitation. So too much water and too little water has always been a problem in our region. So what do you think, how can we deal with these kind of issues?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I mean, we have been under when the climate change was happening, I mean, naturally, it's been happening forever. I mean, there's always changes in the climate. It was like natural climate change. We need to distinguish that versus the human-induced climate change.
Exactly.
So when we look at the human-induced climate change, pre-industrial era climatic changes, societies did face too much and too little water as well. There were droughts in the past. There were flooding in the past. But that was those people who lived on those habitats, like the people who lived in drought-ridden areas like deserts or near deserts, or people who lived in flood-prone areas. Evolutionarily, they adapted to those conditions.
Exactly.
And that adaptation was kind of like helped them and built the resilience in their overall, not only individually, but households and communities, to be able to anticipate that drought, anticipate the flood, and do something about it. And they built these mechanisms. We have some great examples even in like a sub-Sahara region. We have some examples in the mountain communities where people have been able to adapt for that. But with the climate change, since we have started to, I really want to call like global climate change or global warming as like global weirding. And what you're saying, like too much water, too little water, it's literally an example of this, the increased variability in the climatic change because of the human-induced greenhouse gas emissions that is making the water wacky. So that global weirding makes it very difficult for us to predict with precision that what is going to happen. Like our predictions of like the weather forecast of temperature is like pretty good for next like 2 days, a week maybe.
I'm coming to that point, exactly what you said. Like how do we fund and finance for those issues, because not only for the mitigation, but the adaptation part and building resilience of the communities is must for in this situation of too much and too little water, because recently in the late October, we see the unseasonal floods in our country, and the farmers, the paddy that were ready to harvest, they already harvested, and due to the floods, they had a huge economic loss. So I want to, at this point, as we have such kind of early warning system and the capacity building of the local communities, the resilience capacity, then that the loss could have been reduced. So how could we reduce that? I want to ask you, like particularly on these issues, that how do we fund the funding mechanism to ensure the funding for that compensation mechanism, loss and damage, and financing the poor and vulnerable who are affected by the extreme events?
Yeah, this is really a great follow-up question to what we were discussing, because like the vulnerable communities, poor communities, especially as we're talking about like South Asia, people living in Africa, people living in Latin America, they cost they really did not cause the climate change as much. Their contribution to climate change is not as much, but they're the ones who are facing the brunt of the consequences of the climate change, right?
Exactly.
So there is a kind of like a spatial incoherence between the causes and consequences of climate change. So right now, the early warning, early action systems that we were talking about in our presentation, or these new green infrastructure kind of technologies that our collaborators from Singapore, Taiwan presented, or the kind of work that you're doing in like in mountain communities, all of that requires investments to kind of like address these challenges. So for example, very quickly, like early warning systems that even have been set up, they are set up at country scale. So I'll give you an example of like nothing against USAID, but they've done a great work with their FUSE program. That's a famine early warning system program in Africa that's expanding. But they give forecasts at the country scale or at like very high coastal resolution, which is not really useful, as much useful for the local communities. So we need to have high resolution satellite and sensor data fusion technologies that can predict exactly to like at the nth level of precision that this is what's going to happen in this household, in this community, who's going to be vulnerable to heat wave, who's going to be vulnerable to flash flooding, who's going to be vulnerable to like the drought that's coming. And we have the technologies that exist. In the science have shown that these technologies can be built. Of course, we can improve the infrastructure of sensor networks. We can deploy more satellites, especially the satellite coverage for developing countries is not as much. So I mean, I think like one element of these investments that are needed are in building the technology. But I also want to point out that in the last 50 years, organizations like World Met Organization and these other organizations like this, sponsored by World Bank, have really done like a lot of technologically heavy early warning systems, but the focus on communicating that forecast to the communities. Like what we call
that is the gap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Pilar said like the community-centric early warning systems. Like how do we, and that's what we're calling like the end-to-end like early warning, early action systems. So you communicate the information to them. And just one very quickly, one final point that I want to make is that about the investments that are needed have to be distributed equitably all parts of the world, not just based on some criteria where like the international agencies, like say from Green Climate Fund or Adaptation Fund, they need to have very consistent criteria of the vulnerability and the risk exposure of these. And for example, we've shown the water stress. So for example, those water stress communities need to be prioritized for the investments. But when we look at the actual investments that we made by Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund and World Bank, Jeff, in the last 10 years, those vulnerable communities are not being represented as equitably as they need to be. And I think like that's the point that we need to make. And like these mechanisms also have governance challenges, where when we want to launch projects with these like Green Climate Fund or Adaptation Fund, those are only, we have to get the approval of like country points. But the country points are only for the projects within the country. When we are working transboundary, like highlands to oceans, we need to have some governance mechanisms in these agencies that can enable integrated basin-wide funding, not just within a country basis. So sorry, it took a little bit longer.
Yeah, exactly. That's very enlightening. As we talk about in our country, that we got the forecast system that heavy rain, there will be heavy rain. But the system, the farmers couldn't understand, the local mechanism, the channel of communicating the information, that was not proper. So we need to bear the huge loss. So Kathleen, as we talk about the community voices and their voices need to be heard, as Asim mentioned, so how the community voices could be heard or how they could be involved in these transboundary cooperation issues? So could you please explain a bit?
Well, there's a lot of lip service given to including people in communities, and it's very different from actually involving people in creating their own place-based vision for their own communities. So there's a big gap between talking about inclusion and actually practicing it, and really enabling and empowering people to have not just a voice, but real power in their own lives and their own communities. There are a lot of social innovation practices and approaches that are coming out now. And the older ones could be as simple as now I can't think of the word for it, but the people have phones now, so there are a lot of ways to connect people using technologies over the phone. And I'm in a number of groups that have non-hierarchical power structures where a different person is taking notes, or maybe multiple people in the room are taking notes at the same time over a common document that's in the cloud. And there are some great efforts sometimes by cities that have funding to provide technical support to communities so that they have access to view some of the science, some of the maps, some of the images of scenarios that could unfold based on different decisions that their community could make. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Exactly, without engaging the communities, we cannot, cope with the crisis, because they are the most vulnerable, they are facing the impacts, and they are the one who need to overcome with this kind of actions and the solutions. So we need to engage them throughout the process, even in the decision-making process, the capacity building process, and as well as accessing the finance. That would be more important for in the coming days as well. And we are talking about melting temperatures, water security issues, not only the mountain glaciers, but the polar glaciers adding to sea level rise, both leading to extinction of not only the small islands and the mountain habitats as well. So from this common platform, we demand the need of the collaboration between the mountain and the small island countries in the international climate change negotiations and the process, and deal with the transboundary issues, water security issues, and the climate change issues, basically for their rights as well. And also it is the issues of the survival, as we discussed from the beginning. So I think that is the main aim of our session, and we wanted to raise the voice of the people who are more vulnerable and who are in the front line of the climate change impacts. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I would just want to add one more thing, is that and we've seen this in COVID, for example.
Yeah.
The older people who are vulnerable, who are living in the nursing homes, and like in the United States, I saw this, and also in Europe, where the people who are the most vulnerable were not communicated what needs to be done about this, right? And so if you look at the number of deaths that have happened, millions of older people died because nursing homes were they kept these things in dark. The information was not communicated to the vulnerable people, and they did not have any adaptation mechanism, like what to do about it, right?
Exactly,
so they cannot just pull out the older people who are being kept in the nursing homes. In this case, the reason I'm providing this analogy is because some of the work that we were doing in the Mekong Basin or in the Indus Basin, we noticed that for example, in the Indus Basin, flash flooding, you mentioned the example of Ghulam.
Yeah.
Glacial lake outburst flooding.
Exactly.
So I've been working on a Green Climate Fund project, and we've been using satellite data sets to predict glaciers and the changes in the glacial lakes and predict where the flooding is going to happen. Now, that kind of how do we engage those mountain communities which are very sparsely located? It's not like urban areas where you have dense populations. So even accessibility, there are not too many roads. Those communities, they do not have even the digital technologies at the same level that they need to have. So the accessibility and communication is, for example, a challenge. That how do you really go about doing that? And I think, with some of the technologies, like she said, okay, there are phones available, some of these technologies are available. So we can invest in the technologies where these kind of cell phones and these digital microgrids of internet accessibility could be installed on those villages, so they are digitally connected. Exactly. And I think these kind of investments are technologies exist, but we need to make sure that we reach out to the vulnerable people.
Yeah, the vulnerable people or the communities whom we are talking of, who are left behind, they should have access to those technologies. Basically, that is the thing, they need to be access in that technologies, as we are talking about the common vision of the Sustainable Development Goals and agenda of leaving no one behind. They are the more vulnerable, but they don't have that kind of information, that kind of access. So we need to talk on that to reach,
absolutely.
to reach
and
the,
with And an additional point that I would make is like it's also about the design of those technologies. We actually just got a $3 million grant from National Science Foundation about responsible innovation in precision agriculture and its impact on the future of the work, and that's about food security. Like how the point is that if you design a technology that could not be understood by the people, so for example, if somebody has never seen these technologies, so they need to be also taught and trained how to utilize that technology. So that means that we need to design and co-design the technology in a way. So Dr. Pilar was, for example, in her presentation, she was using the word co-production or co-design of these technologies. I think like that's very, very critical to be able to reach to these.
But that should be and friendly to the farmers and the local communities, and but it should be like equitable, benefitable to all, and eliminate all forms of this extreme, like human sufferings, and represent the unique opportunity to promote the human rights as well. We need to look after that aspects as well. Equality part, we should look on that as well, and we need to encourage the local governments right now who are working closely with the communities to develop, effective and efficient collaborative partnership initiatives with such kind of technology hubs, and replace at the community level for benefiting the community on their behalf, and to tackle this climate change impact and issues in the coming days as well. I think we need to look after that side as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, and I think that's, like maybe you want to point out like that there are a lot of these inequity challenges that we have seen in the twin work and some of these other work that you've been doing, like where the resource limitations for the communities are not there. I mean, some of these communities just don't have the resources, sorry. Like they just can't, they want to do these things to build the capacity, but they don't have the resources to do that. And so there are these questions of like investments. Like where does the funding and financing come into play? Like how
and all the financing and funding that should go directly to the communities for benefiting them, and the government who are working, in the negotiation process, and who are talking in the table. So this kind of discussions need to be moved forward through the table, so that will directly benefit to the highland, small island communities, as well as the mountain communities, to cope with this kind of extreme events and the disasters, including technology transfer and including all the discussions which are undergoing right now. I think
absolutely, and I think this is also like the sustainability issue is also very important. Like I was talking about, for example, dams.
Exactly.
So dams are a very interesting case because they have been touted as like, okay, their adaptation mechanisms, they can store the water. As you were saying, like, well, there's more water, there's less water, what to do about it? The engineers would say, dams are the perfect solution. You can control the water, but as like our collaborators from Taiwan showed, that you need to really store the water where it falls, either like make it in impermeable ground, like soil or ground that matters, or store it right there, as opposed to storing in these big reservoirs. Because, guess what? What are the downsides of reservoirs and dams? The communities which are downstream, who are, as I showed in my maps, who are living in downstream, like in Mekong River basin, we have seen that there are like about 20 million people who depend on fishing in the Mekong Delta when it goes into South China Sea, and the fishing populations are declining because, as you saw, like in Mekong, there's so many dams that are being upbuilt. So from sustainability perspective, like to say that, okay, we can build the dams and address this problem, and we have done the adaptation, that's not sufficient because, you're taking away the livelihoods of about so many vulnerable communities downstream, even though it is on paper an adaptation action. But you have to look at the vulnerabilities of the ground, like what's happening downstream, and look at it from the integrated perspective, and come up with some design considerations. You can design the dams that also keep the fishing populations alive, or that also respect the environmental flows of the rivers downstream, so the death of the rivers does not happen. We have seen, like in the United States, for example, Colorado River is already dying. It's not reaching Mexico. It used to be because of the droughts and now with the water diversions upstream. Indus Basin faces similar challenges. I think that I'll just make this point that with the sea level rise, so this is the oceans part, we didn't have a chance to talk a lot about it. With the sea level rise, the salt water is intruding into these dying rivers in the downstreams. So that saltwater intrusion then makes it very, very difficult for people to grow food in those delta regions, which used to be very fertile lands.
Yeah.
I think like that's another very massive risk that we need to think about.
So we have a lot of things to do in our country after we move forward, after this scope, yeah.
Right.
We have a lot of homeworks. The national governments need to do a lot of homeworks well in their own country after this, all this negotiation process and all these things. And basically the governments should align with the local development policies and the measures and plan at federal and provincial levels in the country when they take back the message of the COP in the country level. So that is more important exactly for the vulnerable communities which we are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's anything you want to add, otherwise the time is going to end. We need to close the sessions. Yeah, it was really great hosting this session, and I'd like to thank Professor Asim, Catalina, and all our speakers who joined us virtually. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for highlighting the issues and raising the voice of the community peoples, talking about the transboundary water issues, climate change issues, talking about the agendas of the mountain people, mountain communities. So I'd like to thank everyone and hope the regional and the global cooperation is the must. We alone cannot do everything. On behalf of CSOs, not only CSOs, private sector, government, academia, the role of each and everyone is really important so that we can move forward and work on behalf of the communities for the survival of the humankind and the mountain people and the lowland communities. Okay, thank you.